Green Prince, Mosabs Hassan Youssef, knows all sides of this so well. His father is a founding member of Hamas.
It shows you the level of corruption and the absurdity. They forgot about the Hamas leaders. They want to give Hamas a lifeline. Terrorist group who committed the worst genocide of our time.
Here's a video of a conversation between Chris Cuomo and Mosabs Hassan Youssef. Now, Mosabs Hassan Youssef is the son of Sheikh Hassan Youssef, one of the founders of Hamas. That was the world he grew up in. He grew up in the world of Hamas. He was deeply involved in Hamas. He managed a lot of their finances. Ultimately, being a good person, he saw the evil of Hamas for what it is, and for a while actually was active as a spy for Israel in Hamas and passing along a lot of intelligence, saved a lot of innocent lives. And ultimately he left. And here he talks with Chris Cuomo about this recent arrest warrant that the ICC issued for Bibi Netanyahu. Hilarious joke that it is. And Chris, I have to say, Chris has been surprisingly solid, very solid in general, especially over the course of the past year, on the issue of Israel and Hamas and the Palestinians, October 7th, etc. On this whole thing, Chris has been very, very solid, mostly really on point. There's one, I would say, kind of big thing that he gets wrong in this video, but mostly he's spot on. And Mosabs Hassan Youssef is very, very strongly pro-Israel, anti-Hamas, and has a very clear, straight set of values. So let's see how the conversation plays out.
The Green Prince, Mosabs Hassan Youssef, my friend, knows all sides of this so well. His father is a founding member of Hamas, okay? Mosabs worked for his father. They then are in prison. He sees the reality of what Hamas is becoming. He's against it. He can't change it. He decides to be part of the effort to stop Hamas and save people from terrorism, and now he joins us. My brother, I am thankful for you as Thanksgiving is upon us. I am thankful for you being in my life and my friend.
Thank you, Chris. Happy Thanksgiving.
So, on a political level, why, if people wave this away and say, well, who cares what the ICC says? They don't have any real enforcement power, and we know how certain people feel about what's happening in Israel. It doesn't really matter in terms of what happens in the war. What is your take?
Well, this is very significant. It shows you the level of corruption and the absurdity, actually, of the situation. Because they did not issue only arrest warrant against Bibi Netanyahu, they also issued a warrant for Muhammad al-Daif. This is a corpse, a dead man, confirmed dead a few months ago. And they forgot about the Hamas leaders. This is their responsibility, number one, to condemn Hamas. Since the beginning of the war, they failed to condemn Hamas under the Chinese and Russian pressure, giving Hamas a lifeline. Hamas leaders are in Turkey right now. It's their responsibility to bring these criminals, war criminals, to justice. And they are not doing that. Instead, they have been pressuring Israel. Pressuring Israel because they want Israel to surrender. This is their goal. And they want to give Hamas a lifeline. Terrorist group who committed the worst genocide of our time.
I mean, there are two things that he says here that both of which are so true about this whole, ICC situation, International Criminal Court. It is a criminal court. It's a court that is criminal. That's the actual correct meaning of the name International Criminal Court. It's an international court that is criminal. Number one is the profound corruption of the court. I mean, the court is so morally corrupt and bankrupt, not to mention practically and functionally corrupt, to the point that, and he said this, it's absurd, the absurdity of it all. The claims that they make, or this case, the fact that they issued an arrest warrant for Bibi relative to all the other people and entities that they could have and should have, they have 1,000-fold better reason to issue arrest warrants for and haven't been interested in even having a conversation about them. And the claims that they make that they're officially issuing the arrest warrant for are all completely farcical. None of them make any sense and are all completely out of touch with reality. And I mean, yeah, he's spot on. It's a joke. The court has made a joke of itself. Has, lifted off the mask, showing how much of a joke it is and how deeply corrupt they are and how little relevance they have for anyone who actually cares about the truth and about morality and ethics and the well-being of humanity as a whole. And let's continue.
Israel is not committing a genocide in Gaza. It's not ethnically cleansing what so-called Palestinians. The crime and the blood in Gaza is on Hamas' hands, and I find it hard to believe why people cannot see it for what it is.
Because there's so much death of women and children that are on their phones.
How do we know, Chris? All the statistics of the death, the numbers, I hear the number 40,000, and even some people say 100,000. Where did this number come from? The ICC are not on the ground. They don't have their people there to count the dead people. This is Hamas statistics. And we are talking about the most populated area in the Middle East, where terrorists have been embedded everywhere, dug tunnels, used hospitals, schools. Any modern army, there is no way for the IDF or any other modern army to avoid civilian casualty. And I think the IDF did everything within their ability to minimize the civilian casualty, while Hamas did everything within their ability to maximize the civilian casualty. Then they exaggerated the numbers, they lied to the international community, and they played on the emotional nerve of the West.
All right, so here Mosab opens up by stating the obvious fact, the obvious truth that Israel is not doing anything that's remotely belongs even in the same sentence as the word genocide. There's no genocide happening in Gaza. There are a lot of people dying and being hurt, unfortunately. That doesn't include the terrorists. They deserve it. That's not unfortunate. Maybe it is at some level, but it's an unfortunate necessity. But anyone who doesn't deserve it and gets hurt or killed, it's unfortunate. That doesn't make it genocide. Okay, the definition of genocide is very specific, and it includes specifically the intent to get rid of a group of people, nationality, ethnicity, etc. Which, if Israel had any interest in doing that, the whole Gaza would have been a lifeless parking lot in 20 minutes. And we all know that, right? To suggest that Israel has any sort of genocidal intent is ludicrous. But Chris points out that the reason why people talk about genocide is because of the numbers of deaths. First of all, the numbers of deaths don't go anywhere near genocide, considering what they could and would be if Israel not only had a genocidal intent, but if Israel if the IDF was not going out of its way to minimize casualties, they'd be 10x what they are or more. But the numbers are big, and so people get upset and emotional and talk about genocide. And his response, Mosab's response to this is perfect, which is two things. First of all, the numbers have no reliability. We have no reason to expect that those numbers have anything in common with the truth. The numbers come from Hamas. The source of the numbers is Hamas. And we've had clear examples of where they took incidents where a handful of people were killed and publicized it as 1,000 people killed by Israeli airstrikes when they weren't even Israeli airstrikes to begin with. And all the Western newspapers, all the corporate media ran with it within literally seconds. Every single front page talked about the Israeli airstrike that killed 1,000 people in a hospital. Turns out, not only was it not an Israeli airstrike, but the missile that did land there, that was fired by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, landed in the parking lot and burnt a car and maybe hurt someone. But the whole world was in an uproar about the 1,000 innocent women and children that Israel killed in a hospital when it's completely made up and everyone ran with it. It's the same thing. So the numbers coming out of there have no reliability. We don't know that the actual numbers are anywhere near what they claim they are, 40,000 or otherwise. That's first of all. And second of all, even if the numbers are true, numbers without context don't mean much at all. Right, now let's say that it were 40,000 and that's an unfortunate, and let's say that includes lots of civilians and women and children and innocent people, which is terrible and it's unfortunate and it's a tragedy. That has nothing to do with whether or not Israel is involved in genocide. It has nothing to do with whether or not Israel is doing anything wrong. Forget genocide. Right, to assume that because a lot of people are dying, a lot of Palestinians are dying, therefore Israel is committing genocide, without any context, it's completely a cognitive distortion. Because the numbers are what they are, because Hamas goes out of their way to increase, to maximize the numbers of civilian deaths and casualties. And everybody knows this, we all know this, they don't hide it. They say loudly and proudly that they use women and children as human shields. So even if the numbers are correct, which we have no way of knowing whether or not they're even remotely close to the truth, even if they are correct, that's got nothing to do with whether or not Israel's even in the wrong, let alone committing genocide. Hamas is playing the game perfectly. They know that they are the world experts at doing this. And they can do it better than anyone else because they're very happy to kill the women and children who are officially under their responsibility because they're the government of Gaza. They're very happy to kill them all for metrics that suit them. And so they can do this better than anyone else. They inflate the number of deaths and injuries by putting people in harm's way, by firing rockets from refugee camps and hospitals and school playgrounds, etc. And then they use that to play on the heartstrings of well-meaning, well-intentioned people in the West. Hamas, they don't have any hearts. They don't have hearts. But they're very good at playing on the strings of the hearts of well-meaning people in the West. But to think that because of those numbers, even if they're real, that has any bearing on whether Israel's doing anything right, wrong, committing genocide or otherwise, is a cognitive distortion, because without context, the numbers don't indicate anything other than what they indicate, which is that this many people were hurt and this many people were killed. And we don't even know if the numbers are real. So it makes sense that people get upset when they see the numbers. And they're being useful idiots for Hamas if they are going on to claim that Israel is committing genocide. They're being useful idiots for Hamas. If someone gets upset, that just makes them a humane person, a healthy human being. But if someone thinks that because the numbers are what they are, that makes Israel in the wrong, they are the useful idiots for Hamas. It's plain and simple.
On that level, I do believe, and you've heard me say this before and I maintain it, I think Israel's stance on aid, I understand Hamas takes the aid. I get that you have to be careful about what you let in because what else is coming in. I get all of that. But the lack of aid and the lack of increase in aid, even though there has been an increase in the complaints about it, I think feeds the perception that Israel is trying to be as harsh as possible. Do you think they should change their posture towards aid and be like, as you reference, America was? We were killing everybody in Iraq also, but then there'd be convoys of aid right behind it. I know that that's an odd paradox, but that's how we did it. They are not.
Listen, this is another lie. I just came back from Gaza. I saw with my own eyes 800 trucks waiting after Israel searched the trucks. And the problem is logistical on Hamas' part because they steal the aid. Then they sell it to the Gazans. Also, there is another important thing that the humanitarian organizations are not paying attention to, that Hamas smuggle weaponry using the aid trucks. and I saw what Hamas had been smuggling up to that point, all type of weaponry and explosives. So Israel must finish this war as fast as possible. If Hamas continue to smuggle weapons using the aid trucks, then this war is going to continue forever. Gaza has enough food, luxury items, not only the basic items. And I saw the items going into Gaza every day. We have about 300 trucks going into Gaza every morning, 300 trucks. This is a lot more than the situation before October 7th. So the people who say there is a humanitarian crisis, that we have lack of aid, they are just trying to delegitimize Israel, pressure Israel to cease fire. Cease fire means to surrender. And this is not acceptable, because if Hamas stays in power for another year, they will rebuild their military, they will dig more tunnels, they will smuggle more weapons. Then we are going to be in the first square again, where they hijack society, take hostages, then possibly invade Israel again. And we don't want to be in this situation. This is a very ugly war, and I want the war to finish. Israel wants the war to finish. This is exalting the Israeli economy, and we all understand that. But we have to remove Hamas from power. This is the most important goal of this war.
I understand that, and it is maddening that if Hamas wants this to end and the suffering is so real of its people, which I believe it is, they should just give back the hostages.
Exactly.
Then they have the leverage. All right. Mosab, I got to jump. I will call you, or you're very hard to get in touch with, of course, but I will find a way to reach out and say Happy Thanksgiving. I appreciate you, and thank you for making the case.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay, so one of the things that Chris does here, I think I alluded early on in my introduction, that there's something here that I think Chris gets very wrong, and that's this idea of the aid. Right, he opens up saying, I get it, that the issue is, or one thing that people get upset about is Israel's stance on aid. Okay, what's Israel's stance on aid that he thinks, has leaves some room to be desired? So it starts off with, he starts off saying, I get that Hamas is stealing the aid. And I get that Hamas are smuggling weapons in with the aid. But then he goes on to say, shouldn't Israel just be giving more aid? People are upset, and people think they're trying to be inhumane because they're not sending aid and they're not increasing the aid. It's simply not true. The numbers are out, and there is enough aid going into Gaza for every single person in Gaza to be gaining weight and becoming overweight. That's how much aid is going in. This is not an supply aid issue. The issue here is not that there isn't enough aid. It's not that the aid isn't being sent in because of concerns that Hamas are going to steal them. The aid is being sent in. Enough aid goes in every day for every single person in Gaza to be gaining weight steadily on a daily basis. Every single person in Gaza could be consuming more calories than they need every single day. And if they're not, it's not a question, it's not a matter of how much aid is going in. It's a matter of the fact that Hamas are stealing the aid. They're killing people who try to take food, shooting them at point blank range in the back, brutally murdering them in the streets just for this crime of trying to take some food that Hamas wants to steal for control and power and money. There's nothing to do with Israel sending in aid. And the basis, the claim he makes is completely unfounded. In fact, it's just wrong. And the points that he opened up with are correct. Hamas is stealing the aid. That's the reason that there isn't. That's the reason that people are hungry. If people are hungry, that's the reason. It's got nothing to do with how much aid is coming in. If it's all being stolen by Hamas, if there's already an excess, if there's already a surplus relative to the caloric needs of the population, and people are going hungry, it's not a supply issue. It's a corruption and theft and murder issue on the part of Hamas. Sending in double and triple is just going to increase the theft and increase the corruption and increase the murder on their part of people who try to get more food. That's all. And the smuggling of weapons is a very real thing. It's not simple. It's not like, oh, Israel should just allow more trucks. Every single truck that they let in carries a very high risk of carrying weapons to Hamas, who have shown and stated clearly that they will do everything they can repeatedly and continuously to murder innocent Jewish civilians in Israel. Sending in more aid is, number one, not necessary because it's not the issue. Number two, it's not as simple a thing as people make it sound. And ultimately, back to the topic of the ICC, Mosabs comes back to the point, which is, at the end of the day, the arrest warrant for Bibi, it has nothing to do with concern for the well-being of Palestinians. Because if it did, there are other people who they could pursue, who they do arguably have some degree of jurisdiction over, the heads of Hamas who are living in luxury, every single one of whom is a billionaire, all of whom just left Qatar and moved to Turkey. Those are the people who are actually responsible for all of this. Those are real people who are truly guilty of intentional crimes against humanity with real, genuine genocidal intent. But no, let's issue an arrest warrant against Bibi. This is not about the well-being of Palestinians or of anyone else. This is about siding with Hamas for whatever reason, whatever the reasons are, whether they themselves are just so deeply gaslit, or whether they themselves are, morally bankrupt and corrupt. Perhaps all of the above. But this is not about Bibi, and this is not about the well-being of the Palestinians. This is about pressuring Israel to give in and to pursue a ceasefire. Mind you, ceasefire is what existed on October 6th, right? And clearly that's not a sustainable option, but they want to pressure Israel to give in while Hamas still exists. Whatever their motivation for that might be, I invite them to elaborate and to explain, because they're going to have a hard time explaining how that's anything other than evil. Or profoundly ignorant and stupid, honestly. And, Mosabs got it right and said it exactly how it is. This has nothing to do with Bibi, nothing to do with concern for the Palestinians. It has to do with a bias against Israel, a pro-terrorist bias, and an attempt to pressure Israel to capitulate to Hamas. That's what all of this is about. And it's the only thing that it's about.